Sometimes we give ourselves no credit for all the challenges we've overcome. That's where our greatest strength comes from.
You can't witness the greatness within us without it also existing within you.
So we have to have more of us in those rooms where those decisions are being made in places of leadership.
You have to really be strong in who you are.
That's the one thing I can say, Bev, that is missing so much from our young people, being able to get that shared knowledge and appreciation for a lot of women, a lot of things that women before us have done.
Hello, everyone. I just want to welcome everyone to not a special show. It's a spectacular show. And it's something that in honor of Black History Month last month and now Women's Month, why not honor the space of me, which is a Black woman? I celebrate 2 months, but we try to celebrate all year. And one of the things that was said in the podcast early on is that we have to honor our history. And what better way to honor our history than to have a conversation with women who have dedicated their careers to the study of the history of those who came before them. And in particularly, there are very, very, very few rare air moments that you have women whose expertise is in studying the history of Black women. So without further ado, because we want to get right into this discussion, I'm going to bring in my co-host, Dr. Ingrid, who is a phenomenal executive leader, entrepreneur, philanthropist, you name it, she wears every hat, including co-host. Hi, Dr. Ingrid.
Good evening, Coach Bev. How are you?
I am awesome.
Good. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to be here, but most importantly, to collaborate with Advancement of Blacks in Sports, ABIS. We have enjoyed being partners with this series, and it's such an amazing organization that both of us are a part of.
Absolutely.
And so we're very, very fortunate to have you as one of our founding members. Just very quickly before we get started, I wanted to share that ABIS was founded to amplify the voices of athletes, and specifically our Black athletes in the sports community. Our focus is on education, representation and advocacy, financial literacy, and mental wellness. We have a financial coaching program that has reached out to over 12 universities, reaching more than 200 student athletes, teaching them about financial coaching, investment, and it's supported by JP Morgan Chase. And so we are so grateful for that, for JP Morgan to really support our student athletes, specifically our Black student athletes, and teaching them about investment and wealth. We also have just recently partnered with INGRID, and I'm sure everyone is familiar with this organization, remarkable organization that's been around since 1970, giving opportunities to young men and women in high school, college, for interning, paid internships, so to help them get a jump start with their careers. And so those are just a couple of the main programs that we have, but the best thing that we have going right now, which reaches so many more people, is our gala. We have a Champions and Legends Gala each year. This will be the third annual gala, May 31st through June 2nd, in not Washington, D.C. It's at the MGM National Harbor. And this year, we're so fortunate to honor not only Coach Beverly Kearney for all of her wonderful things, but Ray Lewis, Ben Crump, Wendell Scott, and in terms of his family members will be there, Lonnie Ali, Dr. Dwayne Edwards, Paxton Baker, and the 1982 Cheney State women's basketball team. And so we have the opportunity each year with our gala to honor our own, And who best to do that but us? And so I encourage you to go on our website to weareabis.org so that you can find so much more about our organization, our watch list. We send out watch lists of football, men's and women's basketball, and volleyball coaches, Black coaches, and we send these lists to search firms, to athletic directors, to commissioners. So we are about promoting us in the sports industry, and we welcome all of you to join. So thank you so very much for allowing me to have that time to share about ABIS, Coach.
Well, let's get into one of ABIS's programs, which is not simply educating financially, but educating about how to be successful, how to be the greatness that we were all designed to be. And you can't get to where you're going without truly understanding and having a true appreciation of the powerful journeys that went before you, because we all stand on the shoulders of those who've made sacrifices for us to even have the opportunities to be where we are in the rooms that we're in right now. It didn't just happen. It wasn't just laid out. We came from a storied history, not just of struggle, but most importantly, of power, of intelligence, of wisdom, of love, of spiritual beings. So without further ado, let's get our panel in here, Dr.
Yes.
Ingrid. We have Dr. Erica, Dr. Talitha, Dr. Ashley, and Dr. Daina. Wow. So even though I had the first question, you have to acquiesce to someone whose question is better than the one I was going to ask. Dr. Ingrid, let's get this started. I'm so excited.
Yes, well, I am so honored to be here this evening with each of you to learn more about your journeys. I've been in higher ed for more than 30 years on the collegiate side, but also as a faculty member, as a dissertation chair just recently. And so I really admire all that you do. I've wanted to do so much research, and I have a little book on all these things I want to research and talk about, especially for Black women in sports and Black student athletes. But I've never had the time. So anybody want to coach me on that, just let me know. I need a mentor. But just awesome what you all are doing. And I hope that this show continues to promote what you're doing and more people to read about all the wonderful research that you've done. So my first question is very simple. Can you elaborate or just share what experience, or was it someone that led you and inspired you to focus on the research and the work that you do?
Oh, gosh. I guess I'll go first. I want to say thank you for having us on. These are my sister scholar colleagues, friends, little sisters, big sisters that I've been in conversation with and community with for decades. And it's an honor to be together with one another. We are all scholars of Black women's history, and we've been doing work in Black women's history for collectively probably more than 30 years. I'm not going to age some of us, but I'll just say collectively. I think my inspiration came from a few different experiences, and I've talked about these before, but having one negative and one positive experience as a college student, where I took a class on African American history. I was an econ major, took a class in African American history, and it was taught by a professor who used the N-word every single day. And all the examples that he used were very offensive. And I ended up writing him a letter and saying that I didn't agree with the way he taught, and I couldn't imagine that the only examples he had for African American history referred to us as the N-word. And I had got put on probation, and I had to meet with him every Wednesday. And in those conversations, I learned about the field of history and about history being a field of interpretation, and about perspective and about experience and the things that you bring to the way you interpret primary documents and records. And I thought that I wanted to change my major and become a historian. And then shortly after that, my graduate advisor, Dr. Brenda Stevenson, had arrived at UCLA, and I took a class with her on slavery, and that kind of sealed the deal for me to then want to go on and write books and do research on African American women and the history of slavery.
Wow, thank you for sharing that.
Dr. Ashley, would you like to go?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee, and I grew up with a mother who loved history, but the only real option available for her for a while was actually being a social worker. But that doesn't mean that she didn't really kind of leave me breadcrumbs that made me excited about history growing up. Both my parents went to Fisk, and like when I went to write any research project or do anything, they took me like to the Fisk archive. You can only work here. They were my introduction to the ways people write history. They were my introduction to the archive. And they were leaving me breadcrumbs for how to do this work, I truly believe. That being said, I was a French and Spanish major in college, so I didn't follow the breadcrumbs for quite some time. And it wasn't until I met some of the activists that I now write about that really kind of reinterested me in writing this history. And then I went to Spelman, and I had a teacher who pulled me aside one day and said, "What are you doing with your life? Why are you writing in French and Spanish and learning this language when the questions you really want to ask, the things I hear you talking about are meeting these activists, right? And talking to them." And so he put me on my path to grad school. And since then, I have been writing and researching about Black women organizers in the civil rights and Black power era.
Miss Talitha, Dr. Talitha.
So my introduction to the research that I do came through a slightly different path. And it was through the stories of my great-grandmother.
Oh,
Her stories of living and surviving and loving my great-grandfather in Jim Crow, Georgia. They were both semi-literate. They didn't have college educations. I'm first gen, everything. And so hearing her tell stories about living near the worst chain gang in the state of Georgia, hearing stories about, what it was like to scratch out a living in an environment where, her mother, who was a sharecropper, her father died when she was 5 years old, scratch out a living for them just to feed them and put food on the table, really in many ways inspired me to write about working class Black women in the post-Civil War South, but primarily working class incarcerated Black women.
wow. Dr. Erica?
Yeah, well, first let me thank you also for having all of us on. It's a nice kind of moment to sort of hang out with friends and people who I respect deeply. I'm a Philadelphian, and so I grew up in a city where history was in our backyard, and you can't sort of escape the landscape of Philadelphia without thinking deeply about its connection to the founding of the United States, right? The sort of city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. And even sort of given that, I always liked history in high school. I just sort of thought about it as storytelling, like true stories is what I would sort of call it when I was younger. And when I went to college, you kind of, sometimes you tend to major in the things you feel like you do well in, and what you do well in is usually the stuff that you like. And I liked history, but I had no plans to go into academia. I was gonna be an attorney and go make some money. That was, that was the expectation, sort of coming from a very kind of humble background with parents who, sacrificed to get me where I was. And so I was going to major in history, but with the plan to go to law school. And, similar to Dr. Ashley, I, had this kind of experience with a specific faculty member who actually made me think about being a professional historian. And someone who Dr. Ashley, who everybody on this, all my colleagues know, Dr. Evelyn Higginbotham was my advisor as an undergraduate. And I took every class with her in African American history. And she asked me a similar question to what Dr. Ashley got, which was, you should think about being a historian. And I was like, how much money do you make with that? Like, how do you even do that? And these are very real questions, I think, especially for
Absolutely.
for Black folks who are going to college, whose parents and family members have cobbled together, tuition and room and board, and you can go there and tell stories. Like, what's actually going on here? And I asked that question: what does that actually mean? How do you become a historian? Mm-hmm. And I had no idea you could get a PhD in history. I thought you only did that in psychology. And so I did not know. I'm the first person in my family to have a PhD. And when it was explained to me and I was told that you probably won't be rich, but you'll live comfortably and you'll do something that you love. And I remember sitting in the classroom and watching, it was a civil rights history course, and watching the series Eyes on the Prize. And this was in the early 90s. And I remember saying to myself, I want to be that person on the screen. I want to be that woman who is telling everyone about this history that I felt like I did not learn in high school at all. And I think we'll probably get into conversation tonight about how we are certain that there are specific states that will make it absolutely clear that history is not to be taught, right? I knew coming from Philadelphia, I hadn't learned that history. And it was sort of that encouragement from a faculty member. It was seeing the visual. It was having an interest in merging both African-American women's history and like Dr. Daina, I focus on slavery, that I wanted to bring those things together, but I also wanted to incorporate television and film in ways that allow the history and the work that we do to reach the broadest of audiences.
Oh my goodness. First of all, I want to say thank you all for the sacrifices that you've made to be in this space, because as you said, this isn't a field of study that is highly promoted, highly encouraged, nor put the financial support in terms of, definitely if you'd have gone into law, you would have made a lot more money. But thank you guys for the decision to be comfortable within the passion that you have for our history. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask the first question from my perspective. Is there one instance, is there one person that you've done research on that totally inspired you? I will give you my own personal example. Definitely my greatest impact, Dr. Daina knows, is Sojourner Truth for me. But in recent times, when I went through a internationally publicized lawsuit with the University of Texas at Austin, I kept referring back because everyone told me it's impossible. And I kept referring back to what Dr. King quit. What had he quit? Had he quit, I wouldn't be in a position I'm in now. And so I've always drawn whenever I ran into racial situations, because I was integrating Tennessee, I was integrating University of Florida, University of Texas. And people say, oh, that's amazing, you're a first. But people don't realize what comes with that first. It was my history. It was knowing the sacrifices. I would say to myself, there's no dogs here. I can go to the bathroom. They couldn't. I would think about the women, because what we forget during the civil rights movement is that it was a lot of the women who were housekeepers who boycotted the bus systems in order for us to get on those buses. So for me, that's my inspiration. Is there a specific person or story that really touched you in a way and goes, whoa, this is powerful? And I'm going to leave that open-ended on the floor. I ain't going to call nobody out. Okay, and y'all, I want to remind y'all are teachers.
Well, somebody for me comes to mind, so maybe I'll start off because this is what I spend my days doing now. But the woman that I would pick that a lot of people don't know about but should know about is a woman named Queen Mother Audley Moore, whose biography I am finishing up right now. So just to give you like the Cliff's Notes version, she was born in 1898 and she died in 1997. So she lived almost the entirety of the 20th century. And Queen Mother Moore was interesting is because she wasn't a dyed-in-the-wool integrationist. She was actually a Black nationalist. And for the better part of 100 years, she really worked for Black people to have control over their communities, to have control over their right to determine their futures, over their economy. And most importantly, she's known as being the founder of the modern reparations movement. You would not be talking about reparations today. You would not be seeing these bills passed in California and other places if Queen Mother Moore hadn't started that work back in the 1950s. So what
Queen Mother Moore.
Queen Mother Audley Moore, yes.
Yeah.
But what I think that she offers me and what I think writing her biography has taught me is that what it takes to stay the course, right? What it takes to stay the course when you know you're probably not going to win, when you know that the world that you're fighting for may never come to fruition, right? And that you know that your ideas aren't popular. I think whether or not you agree with her positions, she really is a model in how to just decide you have a moral compass, point your value system that way, and stay the course.
Thank you. Ladies?
So I can follow up on that. I was really hard pressed to come up with an example because there are so many different examples in my head. And I probably worn this one out. So everybody on this call has probably heard this example 20 million times. But I opened my book, Chained in Silence, with the story of a young woman named Maddie Crawford. And Maddie was sentenced to life in prison when she was 16 years old for killing her abusive stepfather. And they sent her to the Chattahoochee Brickyard and forced her to work as a blacksmith. It took several, they literally beat her out of her dresses into a men's suit of, stripes. And she worked at the brickyard. She was the only woman there. And then eventually they took her and sent her to the state prison farm. And she was working for the state as a blacksmith and working in the city of Milledgeville. And the state was taking all of her money. And she became a renowned, figure and was actually profiled in the Atlanta Constitution under a headline that read, "Only woman blacksmith in America is a convict." And the reason why I point to this story is because Maddie never was freed. And even in this space where she would spend the rest of her life as a captive, essentially in a new form of slavery, which is, essentially what convict labor consisted of after the Civil War, and it still does. She was able to sort of carve out a space of freedom for herself where she said, I'm going to be stuck here for the rest of my life, but I'm going to use my skills as a blacksmith to liberate me from the confines of this space for at least 8 hours a day. Mm-hmm. Even though I'm going to be exploited, I'm not going to make a dime. And, but this is my way of securing a little bit of freedom, taking a little bit of freedom for myself. And so for me, she just shows like the power of resilience and survival, that exists among Black women for generations, including, enslaved women that we know a little bit more about, but even women enslaved through the carceral system, women even today who are stuck, behind bars and will never see the light of freedom.
Wow. Dr. Daina, Dr. Erica?
I'll let you go, Dr. Erica. I know you got some women.
I'll be like Dr. Talitha and do an oldie but goodie. I was finishing up some research on my first book, which talked about the lives of free and enslaved women in the North. When I was coming across, I was looking through newspapers. That's what we do as historians. We want to go to primary sources to kind of figure out what's happening at a certain moment in time. And I was interested in knowing what was happening in the 1790s. I think I was looking for pricing on flour, something I don't even really remember. I just know that I was looking through newspapers, and the newspaper was a Philadelphia newspaper. And I came across a runaway slave advertisement. And the advertisement said something like, absconded from the household of the President of the United States. And I was like, wait, what? And I looked at the date. I'm like, okay, 1796. That's George Washington. George Washington has a runaway slave advertisement in a newspaper in Philadelphia. And I kept reading, and they gave her name. And this runaway was named Oni Judge, or they called her Oni Judge. I call her Ona Judge, which is the name that she went by in her adult life. So I do that as a nod to adult dignity. So here's this woman. They describe what she looks like. She's slender, medium build, in her early 20s, and she has escaped from the president's house in Philadelphia. And at that moment, I was working on another book. I was finishing my first book, and I immediately was like, okay, who is this woman? And why is it that I'm an expert in African-American women's history and I don't know her name, and I don't know what became of her? And immediately, I think for most of us on this call, we get led to our second projects by projects that we've already worked on. And I promised myself that I would return to her. And in some ways, I don't think I had a choice about that. I feel like, and maybe historians aren't supposed to say this, but I say it anyway. In many ways, I feel like Ona chose me. I didn't her. I feel like I was in the right place at the right time, having done the right work to kind of ground a story, to step back and be able to tell a narrative about an enslaved woman who challenged the most powerful man and woman, his wife, Martha Washington, in the nation, and how her exposed the Washingtons as slave catchers, as enslavers, as slave catchers, and challenged the way we think about the founding of the nation through Ona's eyes. And so it was really that advertisement and that 1796 newspaper that led me to Ona Judge and led me to writing really the only biography of her life.
I got to come back and ask you what happened to her. But anyway, Dr. Daina.
You got to buy the book. You got to buy the book.
I got to buy the book. Okay, we got to tell everybody what the book is. We'll go through all of you guys' books later. But you guys got to read these books. Amazing.
So I am sitting up here thinking about so many women that have influenced my writing and led me on wild goose chases and chased me into the crevices of their lives and the parts that they're hiding, the parts that they're sharing. Some women that I've studied, I don't know their names. I never knew their names, but there's something that they did, an act that they did in history that resonated with me because of their resistance. Some of them chose to cover up their names and want to only be called by the name of Mrs. MRS, period. So I'm going to say there's one person I'll talk about, but I will say that there's these nuggets of stories of women where we only get a slice of their experience, just maybe one quote or one story or one day in their life. But we all write about these women and we all incorporate them in our writings because they too have a story to tell and they too contribute to American history. So I'm going to tell you about Mrs. because I don't know her last name. She just went by the name of Mrs. She made it to, this is in a compilation that has stories of women who made it to freedom, or men and women who made it to freedom. She was still at large, right? So she didn't want to give her last name. But there was a quote in her testimony where she said, where they asked her, well, she says, for those who want to apologize for slavery, I would ask them to experience it for a while. That resonated with me. And I always share that when I can, but that's all. We don't know much else.
Please say that again.
For those who wish to apologize for slavery, I would ask them to go experience it for a while. that resonated with me. Her story resonated with me. I haven't done anything else with it, but that's just one example of, someone who touched me, and that's why I'm not big on apologies for slavery. It's because of her. Like that doesn't do much for me. But I am working on a biography of someone that's married to probably one of the most famous African American males in 19th century history, the most photographed African American males in the 19th century, and that is Frederick Douglass's wife, Anna Murray Douglass. And I always knew I wanted to do a biography, didn't know who I wanted to do it on. There was somebody in a previous book of mine that I thought I was going to write about, but I couldn't find enough about her story. And Anna Murray just kind of kept yearning at me, because the way that there's Douglass biographers, hundreds and hundreds of scholars have written about Frederick Douglass. Most of them say almost the exact same thing about Anna Murray Douglass, and it's very cursory. I don't think anyone's really looked into her life to really to talk about Douglass's story. But their stories about Douglass would change if they knew Anna, and if they knew where Anna came from, and there would be no Douglass if there wasn't Anna. She's the one that helped him become free. She's the one that married him a few weeks after he made it to freedom. She's the one that financed his escape, made his clothing that he used to escape. She's the one that held down his houses in 4 or 5 different cities. These were houses that were part of the Underground Railroad network, where she hosted many, many people and gave birth to 5 of his children, and was with him for more than 40 years. But yet in the obituary of Frederick Douglass in the New York Times, it does not even mention her name. And that's why I'm writing her biography.
And with that in mind, I'm going to let Dr. Ingrid have a question, because I'm just overwhelmed right now of how forgotten we are in history, and so grateful for all of you. Dr. Ingrid, do you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I've been writing down each one of the individuals, the amazing Black women that you all have mentioned. I just want to know, and I've been texting all of my friends to say, you all need to get on this and hear about these women. So my question is, how do we inspire our young women and men to not just raise their voices, but to want that desire to learn? And it was intriguing because most of you said it was some teacher, right? So that led to this passion. And just how do we continue to let our young women especially know about their past? I mean, I'm 56 years old and have never heard about some of the women that you've mentioned, and I feel bad. So I want my daughter, who I sent this to her, but she's in Miami on spring break, so she's not even, I know she's not going to tune in, but all of these names that you mentioned, I'm going to send to her. And I want her, and my oldest daughter, who is a teacher now in the public school system. How do we do this? I want to introduce you all to Dr. Raja Rahim, one of my former students, who's at Appalachian State teaching in African American history and writing a book right now on the history of women in sport, or the history of the CIAA. But it's just, I have this, I want to connect more people to what you're doing. And although you're on a national platform, it's still challenging for us to get to our people. So how do we inspire other young women and men to pursue careers such as yours, but also to learn in this age of banning books and getting rid of DIB and all of that? That was a long question. I'm so sorry. It's just, I've been writing down all this stuff and I'm like, I have so many questions, but we'll start there.
I'll jump in first. I think it's actually very difficult these days. I think more difficult than perhaps when the historians on the panel came of age. We have to value not just history, but the humanities. And I think as a culture right now, there's very little interest or investment really in the kind of work that we do as historians. If it's not, I have a college age son, and just about all of his friends are either in engineering, computer science, or kind of what we call the STEM, right? STEM fields, the hard sciences. And for those of us who teach in the humanities, we see the numbers of our students kind of dwindling every day. So I remember when I began in this profession 24 years ago, that my African American history classes were full. There were wait lists. And now it's lucky, I'm lucky if they're half full. And it's not because it's 8:30 in the morning. It's not because it's on a Friday, because I don't have my classes in, because I know nobody's showing up unless they have to. But this really has everything to do with how I think we value or don't value things like history, English, the humanities, kind of critical thinking. And so I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer or
no, truth. You're
real.
speaking truth
about the heavy lift that will be required to have people truly invest in, learn, and commit to the study of history. I think everyone says, oh yeah, we respect that. That's, especially if February comes and Dr. Daina, Dr. Ashley, Dr. Talitha, Dr. I, Black History Month always takes us out. We're the most popular people there. But I would kind of usher a call that we need to invest in it as much as we say invest in engineering or the STEM fields, and to push our children to think broadly. There's no reason you can't go to medical school and major in history. As long as you do your requirements for biology and chem, you can still major in history, be a critical thinker, and that will play out over time. So I don't necessarily have a recipe for add water, stir, and then all of a sudden our history becomes something that is valued, accessible, and people flock to it, other than February. I think, though, it's a larger commentary about our society and what our society values.
Thank you.
I want to just jump in right quickly, because you said something that is so critical to the evolvement, which is our evolvement is because we are critical thinkers, but we're being channeled away from being critical thinkers by quick access to fake information, which is why in this day and age, Dr. Ingrid, it is so important, because they're trying to rewrite the truth of history. And it's sad that it feels like, Dr. Daina, if you can answer this for me. Here goes the fireworks. I'm sorry, y'all. I don't know where it comes from. I don't even know how it does it.
Well delivered.
But anyway, my question is, it sounds like they've given us permission to celebrate us once a month, and we've fallen into the routine of 1 month a year. It's okay to be Black. Other than that, don't talk about it. You're always bringing up race. It's almost like a guilt about race. So I just want to put that out there in the midst of the conversation of why it's important, especially when places like Florida, et cetera, are all trying to take Black history, even attacking sororities and fraternities in the process, and diversity programs on all college campus, all educational institutions. So I'm just going to throw that in the midst of it as Dr. Ashley, Talitha, and Dr. Daina all speak. So I just wanted to throw that out there and let you guys do your thing with it. It's just amazing.
I'll add something. And I think that while we do have to have a massive investment in the humanities, we do have to value our history. I want to remind people that, like, we have a rubric and we've been here before, right? And what did Black people do? This isn't the first time we've been barred from this. This isn't the first time people have had to go to other means. And really the great thing is what history provides us is the playbook, right? So one of the things that we're just going to have to do is stop relying, especially in states like Texas, right, where it's being outlawed, on the traditional measures to do that. Well, good news. They never let us in anyway. So we always had all these other methods to do so. I told a story about the community history that my mother does. There's a wonderful woman online. She gets on YouTube like once a month and teaches people how to archive, their family's history, right? There are wonderful folks that get on TikTok and YouTube. I know we hate all these things, but they're useful, right? Because they're accessible and talk about this stuff. In the 60s, this period that I study, most people still were barred from school or were in segregated schools. What did they do? They created freedom schools. They went, got somebody that knew what they were talking about and went and sat out under a tree and talked about it. So I would say that if you find that the school system, which has never been great, let's be honest, is not pushing.
It's never been great for us in particular, Dr.
Ashley. Right? Maybe stop asking them for it all the time in that sense. I'm not saying that we shouldn't fight back against the formal outline of it, right? But it's got to be a both and strategy. We've got to invest in having it in our schools because everybody needs to learn it. But there are plenty of folks, including folks on this call and otherwise, that are happy to come talk to a class, right? In K through 12, or talk to them after school. That it's not a school thing, or happy to, come talk to a Saturday school about it. Are happy to jump on this kind of format and do these things. So I think, I would encourage us to look back at history and our ancestors when they've been barred or told that their history is not good enough, and take strength from that, but also strategy from that.
I think too, I want to add that all four of us do this kind of work. We do work in communities. We do work at churches. We do work through fraternities and sororities. We do work through community organizations where we speak and share this history all the time. This morning I did a talk for a major airlines. They had a book club for a major airlines. And I met the woman literally when I was booking a flight, on the phone. And she was like, hey, we started talking about history. She didn't know anything about who I was and what I did. And she was like, oh, I love history. I said, oh, I'm a historian. So she starts asking questions. She calls me back the next day because she knew my name and looked me up and said, we have a book club through the airlines. Can you do a Zoom call? I'm like, okay, I didn't know what it was. I get on the call today. There was 300 people there all over the United States. And you can see them sitting at their gates, on their breaks. And I'm up here talking about Black women's history. So I think, like Ashley's saying, there are other ways, sort of grassroots ways that we have to share this history, but there's also institutional, and we're doing that too. There's also through the media. We're doing, all of us have done documentaries, we're doing stuff behind the scenes where you don't see us. We're doing stuff where we're writing or rewriting. We're working at museums, we're working at cultural centers. We're also working on textbooks, trying to get those stories in and revising U.S. history textbooks. African-American history textbooks include us, but there's places where we need to be more present. Middle school textbooks, high school textbooks, and college level textbooks. So we're doing all of that work. And I think, Dr. Ashley is absolutely right. I mean, Talitha can talk a little bit more about the work that she does with people that are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. We're making sure we're educating, even in places where our books are banned. In the jails and prisons, but we're still getting in there and teaching. We're still connecting to those folks, but it takes an extra effort, and it means that we, like Ashley and Erica were saying, we have to value this work as well.
So I don't have a whole lot to add to what's already been said because I agree with every single thing that's been shared. We definitely have to approach this from a grassroots perspective because let's just face it, our educational system is failing our children, right? Particularly Black children and Black and brown children. So one thing that I would add to this conversation about investment is making sure that we're investing in young people, right? And that comes through mentorship, but it also comes through them seeing representation and seeing us in these spaces, in these K through 12 spaces, and knowing that there's somebody there that cares about them, particularly kids who don't experience school as a safe place. As we understand, the school to prison pipeline pushes more children through, the criminal legal system than it does to college. So it's very important that we're present to, to teach our children, but to also save them.
Thank you.
There's a saying that Dr. Daina knows I love, and it is the "Ain't I a Woman" poem. And what was the meaning behind that? Why did she feel the need to say, "Ain't I a woman"?
let the slavery scholars take that away.
Same.
I'll let you go first, Erica.
Yeah, well, there's actually a lot of there's some controversy about whether or not she actually did say that, but I think what the broader argument was that this statement, this sort of "Aren't I a woman?" As a Black woman, right? A formerly enslaved Black woman, that don't I count too? Can I not be understood, respected as a woman? And I think that when we think about the institution of slavery in particular, that for many, many years, there wasn't much of a sort of distinction between enslaved men and enslaved women, at least in terms of the kinds of history that was written. And it really isn't until the 1980s when my colleague, Dr. Deborah Gray Wright, wrote a book with the title "Aren't I a Woman?" Where she actually really did kind of in detail explain how different an experience of an enslaved woman truly was because of her gender, because of her body, because of the institution of slavery is based upon reproduction. That for those reasons, we have to think about the lives of enslaved women through that lens, that their experiences are different from men. So I was thrilled to hear that, Dinah, that you're working on Anna Marie Douglas's biography. And although Douglas was enslaved, and I don't believe she ever was, or I don't believe she ever was.
Nope.
As a free person living in Maryland, she, of course, saw things, enslaved women who had a very different existence. And I feel like that quote is a reminder, and it's something that we still think about, not just for historians who do history of slavery, but I argue that the work that both Ashley and Talitha have done have kind of cracked open these doors and made us think differently. Okay, what does it mean to be a woman in this kind of early carceral system following the Civil War? What does it mean to be a woman in the kind of 1960s Black Panther, civil rights, social activism moment? That our experiences, our lives are different because of our gender. And while that I think is probably going to be a more complicated story in the 21st century, as we think about the way we attach gender to people, I think at least for the 19th century, there's a little more ease with that. But it's a reminder why the work that I do and that Dinah does on enslaved women is so important, because we have to look at it through the lens of a gendered understanding of slavery. Dr. Dinah?
I don't really have much to add, except when you mentioned, there's some controversy around the question or the word, or the poem, the speech that she gave. They say at the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention, we do know she was not allowed to be a part of the regular audience. She had to stand behind a curtain. We do know that, but there's questions because of the way that the speech was written. She spoke in Low Dutch, and that speech was not written in Low Dutch. It was written in like a Southern dialect. So there's some questions about that. But these are the kinds of things that we as historians always have to sift through. But like Dr. Erica was saying, that it's the point. It's the point of the question. It's the point of the way we understand this and talk about her history, to understand her experience and to understand what it meant to be a Black woman at a time when women were already marginalized, but now you have the double burden of being Black and female.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll let Dr. Ingrid ask her next question. My next question is divide and conquer. We know that there was a concerted effort to break up the families, but there's also a situation where I feel like we're suffering today from a mindset of, with white women being a little bit uncomfortable with Black women, and then the separation, the concerted effort to separate the Black family. So, and then there is the interfighting among Black women, light skin, dark skin, thin, heavy, that normal people go through. Where does our support come, and how does history, was there always this, because technically they're putting us at the bottom of the cultural totem pole, and I know we don't belong there. I know we don't belong there, and I don't understand what happened to the sisterhood that we so earnestly fought for throughout generations. I know that the adversity on these TV shows that they put out, where we're on the show fighting over everything, I don't know if that contributed, or whether or not there was a concerted effort, that there's not the level of support for Black women, which is why that phrase always stands. So who comes to save us if not us? So that's an open-ended conversational question. Please help me out. I truly want to know.
My answer is short. I believe that Black women are the only ones saving other Black women. You know, I think about Say Her Name, which was, you know, a campaign started by Kimberly Crenshaw because of the invisibility or the, lack of conversation around the impact of state-sanctioned violence on Black women. And I think that Black women, I know that Black women historically, through organizations and through informal measures, have always fought for Black women, have always fought beside Black women. And we have always been the ones to save the race, you know, not just Black women. So I hate that reality TV, right, has provided this very, I think in many ways, and this could be a stretch, I mean, I think that it's a very inaccurate representation of Black sisterhood. And I think that it's, you know, very, very narrow and a very microscopic interpretation that is very skewed in my opinion. And I believe that in mass, you know, Black women still have Black women's backs for the most part.
Anyone else would like to contribute to that?
Well, I think about Deborah Gray White, this historian that we've talked about. You know, she wrote a book and talks about Black women in defense of themselves. You know, we have always had to defend ourselves at every aspect of our history. And I am a glass half full person, but I have to say not all skin folk are kinfolk.
True.
You know, just in general, but I think like historically, we were much more together than we have been as time has become more modern. And part of that, I would argue, and like I said, it's hard for me to even say this, I'm not a negative person, but part of that was the segregation. Part of it was, you know, surviving, you know, very, very difficult times in slavery. Part of it was different movements against us. But I do think that some of us have come out of this history, and that's not including me, but some have come out of this history not loving themselves, not loving their Blackness, not loving the history, being ashamed of it. And that's where I think you run into a little bit of problems. And that's maybe some of what we see. We always know that dreaded time when they go to interview somebody about an event or something. You're like, why did they interview that brother, that sister? You know, that like the representation piece is always a challenge for us. But I do think historically, when you look at Black women's organizations, like I'm sure Dr. Ashley can talk about this too, but like, you know, just all the organizations of labor organizing that you find around all kinds of causes where Black women came together to help each other with burial rights, with educating themselves, with all kinds of things. You know, it's just been
midwives back in the day.
Exactly. Doulas.
We did it all.
Yep, exactly.
Dr. Ingrid?
Yes. My brain is already rolling. So I'm sure some of you know Dr. Leonard Moore at UT and the Black Student Athlete Summit. So I've already written down, how can he get a session for the Black student athletes there about this history and about what you all are doing. So I'm on a board with him. So I'm going to make that suggestion. But a couple of my students at Maryville University are doing their research on Black women faculty and as well as Black women presidents. And so my question is, what has been your greatest challenge as a faculty member at a predominantly white institution?
They all started laughing. Everybody said,
well,
oh,
and just
okay.
in case there's someone that's listening, right, that wants to pursue being, in a tenure track, where they are, what should they look out for or watch out for?
I think that the best part of the job is also the hardest part of the job, and that is the level of Black students that depend on you, right? When you are one of a few or a handful, they see you as a friend, they see you as a mentor, they see you as, playing a lot of different roles in their lives. And that is great because you want to be the person that helps them succeed. Perhaps you're the person that, as we talked about when we first got on the call, helps them see both the beauty of history, but also makes them feel like they belong in these spaces, right? And you also want to be the person that perhaps sees them as a whole human being, right? And offers them some grace and understanding in a way perhaps that some of my other colleagues don't. But I would say as a Black person, and particularly as a Black woman, that's a double burden, right? In addition to doing the whole job as it's constituted for everybody else, you're also doing this level of labor, which is a labor of love, but no less a level of labor to make sure Black students are okay. And so I think that one of the things, at least I've learned, is, you have to decide where your boundaries are with that and how to share that burden with others in a respectful way so that it doesn't keep you from moving forward or also just, deplete you, as a person.
Thank you.
Dr. Talitha?
So I agree with what Dr. Ashley had to say, and I don't have a whole lot more to add to that. Besides, my current struggle has been enrolling Black students in my classes. And that's a wider reflection of the university's failure to recruit more Black students to the university. I love my white students. I love my Latinx students, but I'm ready to teach some Black students. And most of my classes are predominantly white. And that, I think, has been a little bit of a challenge for me.
Wow, wouldn't have expected that one.
Yeah, I didn't either. I mean, it's okay, but it is what it is. But I'd like to, like I said, it's a larger reflection of the problem at the university.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like with policies, it's going to get worse before it gets better. So, Dr. Daina?
So mine is kind of simple. I'm going to use a quote from Elie Wiesel and also shared by Nelson Mandela. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. I think the biggest challenge I'm experiencing is indifference to underrepresented minorities, indifference to people that are differently abled, indifference to the isolation of campuses on PWI campuses where Black and brown students are isolated in classrooms where they're less than 2% of the population. My son experienced this at a high school where he was in less than 2% of a population. That the indifference towards presence, the indifference towards diversity, the indifference towards the voice, the experience, I think is very dangerous. And I think that is probably the hardest part of my job.
Wow.
I'll follow up with that and talk a little bit about the personal. and sort of feelings of often of isolation. When I began this journey as a professor, I taught at a large state institution and in a history department. And I was the first Black woman to ever have a faculty appointment in that department. And that was in 2000. And I was the first Black woman, first African American to be tenured in that department. And I think for all of us, all four of us, who have appointments in history departments in particular, they can be very conservative. They can be departments where you don't see many of us. I mean, that's not my current situation. However, it can feel extremely isolating. And we live lives that are very, where we walk on eggshells. In some ways, waiting for the trap door to open, waiting for the standards, the goalposts to shift when it comes to things like third year evaluations or tenure, that things that may have been acceptable for others who come, white men in particular, no longer are applicable to people who look like us. And so there is an emotional toll that it takes on you to always be on your guard. You have to be. And I think what allows us to kind of live through those feelings of momentary of discontent, of some anxiety is, and I'll go back to something Ashley said, is we think about our the women that we study. And, I think about, on a judge, and it makes me shut up real fast. Everything is relative. I understand that, but we draw strength from the experiences, the oppressive experiences, not only of the people that we study, but of our kind of foremothers in the field of history. When I think about the women like Deborah Gray White, who's been mentioned several times today, she kicked open doors. There are many others who we should mention in this in this conversation, who talk about living through, walking through landmines. They did, and sometimes not successfully. Sometimes they left those landmine fields without a limb, and we're a generation that benefits from the actual recognition of a field of African American women's history. For the women who came before us, just one generation before us, there was no such designation until really the 1980s. With Deborah Gray White's Aren't I Woman? That's when we have the first Library of Congress recognition for African American women's history. So, I will still say that while I feel incredibly fortunate, blessed, and in a position now as a senior scholar to not complain too much, I recognize the emotional toll that it can take on us, that you're not really prepared for when you come out of graduate school, or even while you're in graduate school, in terms of the double standards, which are still there.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to wrap this up and allow everyone to give their last words to our audience of advice. For me, this has been extremely powerful because it brings to mind two things. One, we need to be proactive in the type of information that is printed, spoken of, and recorded that about us, about our history, about our lives, about our journey. And it's been amazing listening to all of you women, because I go back to all the television news interviews whenever episodes have happened, like the Breonna Taylor, I think her name is, being killed. Nobody asked us our opinions. We're rarely, they use white women, white men, Black men, but they rarely go to the source on issues pertaining to Black women, um, um, or women in general. We're usually not asked to the table. So what do they say? If you don't get a chair, create your own table or bring your own chair. Either way, we've got to know our history and the wisdom and the knowledge of where we come from, and the strength and the power and the ability to overcome the need for unity, but most importantly, the need to have a voice. So that's my 2 cents. And I'm going to give everyone a chance to leave the audience with something that you think is impactful that you want to tell them.
Dr. Farmer, I know you got to run.
I would just say that one of the great things history tells us is things happen in cycles. And it's just because something is one way now doesn't mean it has to be that way always. So I can know that right now things seem not great in terms of Black history, in terms of Black people. But I want to remind folks that history tells us that people have been here and gotten through it before, and we will get through it again.
Wow, powerful. Oh, your book, please.
Oh,
please
and my book is called Remaking Black Power, How Black Women Transformed an Era.
And we will put up a list of the books on Dr. Ingrid, the ABIS website, and the Pursue Greatness website as well. So thank you, Dr. Ashley. Oh, thank you for your work. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Next, ladies. Don't be shy.
All right. I think I want us to not be ashamed of our history. There's so much strength and so much power and so much love. It's a painful history, but there is joy, and there is Black joy in our history. But I think that, like Ashley was saying, it does give us a roadmap, and we can draw strength on the stories of our ancestors. And if you have any older living relatives, interview them. Find out about a moment in time that they lived. Know your family history. Learn about where you came from, and as far back as you can, and stand on those shoulders and be proud of who you are. In my book, Did a Black Woman's History of the United States with Dr. Callie Nicole Gross, and The Price for Their Pound of Flesh, the value of the enslaved from womb to grave in the building of a nation.
So I'll piggyback on that by saying this conversation is making me think a lot about, freedom and about freedom of education. And freedom of education is a privilege. It's a right, not a privilege, and something that we're all entitled to. And so I think that we have to continue in our fight to claim that right, to learn what we want to learn, and to be able to teach the next generation. And my book is Chained in Silence, Black Women and Convict Labor in the New South.
Okay, I'll bring up the rear. And I think what we study and what we live currently, we can say that we're all trying to get free. And we've been trying to get free since the first Black people walked the shores of this place that we call home. And I think we're all still trying to define and find freedom. And I'll say this, knowing my history moves me one step closer to that freedom. That having that knowledge, which enslavers always wanted to keep from Black people, that they hoped underfunded segregated schools would keep from Black people, that being able to amass knowledge about self, about our ancestors, about our role in the building of this nation, that helps me with my own freedom and knowing value and importance when it's not assigned from external sources. so that the power of knowledge, the power of our history helps me be free.
Dr. Ingrid?
Well, I will just say this. In my retirement last June 2022, I went from being authentically filtered to being authentically unfiltered. And it's so liberating. But I do know a lot of my colleagues are still in the grind. And I would just say my mom has always said to me, you are as broad or as narrow as your experiences. And we must continue to create spaces for our young Black women to learn and have those experiences. And so I'm just floored by all the information. I'm amazed by you all. And thank you so much for sharing this evening. But I would say I'm going to challenge my colleagues to create space for our Black women and young Black women to learn more about who they are and the history and where they came from.
Absolutely. I want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your day and sharing authentically from your heart. You know, this society is pushing so much hatred to a point where it's evolving into a self-hatred. And I want to say this, Daina and I spoke last night, and I think I said to you, there was a saying that said, I'm Black and I'm proud. No, I'm not. I'm blessed to be Black. I'm blessed to be a woman. I'm blessed to have the journey I am on. And I'm blessed to be in the company of greatness. Those that went before me, those that walked beside me, and those that will come after me. How we walk in this moment will either repeat history or create history. It's our option. But you cannot create, and you're destined to repeat if you don't know the essence of where you've come from, the shoulders you've stood on, the struggles they fought through, but most importantly, the greatness they displayed in the face of adversity. You cannot compare generations, but you can always learn generationally. So I want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for being here, and I hope to see you all again. Ash, Maddie B, the production team, ABIS, we thank you for all the work in helping put this together. Ladies, if people don't have you on their campus 12 months a year as opposed to 1 month a year, shame on them. That's on us. We're not March women. We're not February Black. We're 24/7, 365 days of that. Thank you. Love you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Blessings.
Bye.
Bye-bye, you guys. Sometimes we give ourselves no credit for all the challenges we've overcome. That's where our greatest strength comes from.
You can't witness the greatness within us without it also existing within you.
So we have to have more of us in those rooms where those decisions are being made in places of leadership.
You have to really be strong in who you are.
That's the one thing I can say, Bev, that is missing so much from our young people, being able to get that shared knowledge and appreciation for a lot of women, a lot of things that women before us have done.